We're going live now. 3, 2, and 1.
So, good evening, everybody who's joined us from India, and good morning to Canada. Welcome to the Indo-Canadian Business Chambers series of webinars. Today is a very special webinar. We are doing a session about India's growth story in the roads and highways sector. This sector has been a very fast growing and very dynamic sector, and with a lot of potential for further growth. In fact, this sector has also attracted a lot of foreign investment. The Canadian funds have contributed about $50 billion over the last 7 to 8 years, if I'm not mistaken about the time. Despite the pandemic, NHAI, the National Highway Authorities of India, along with the Government of India, have used this time to refine models for foreign investment. And we thought that this is a very important time to carry on the momentum, to show to our participants, to our foreign investors, what the Government of India and what NHAI has been planning and what are the opportunities that are opening up for future investments into India. And for our pension funds and financial organizations who are joining us from Canada, this is an ideal platform to view your issues, if you have any, or to comment, or to get any clarification, because we are very privileged to have with us Dr. Sukhbir Singh Sandhu, who is the chairman of NHAI, and we are very thankful to him for having coming in and sharing his views with us. Dr. Sandhu, welcome to our session here today. And before I go on and ask Dr. Sandhu to give us his views on this, I would like to welcome Ms. Anita George, Executive Vice President in charge of Growth Markets and Strategic Partnerships for CDPQ. Accompanying her is Mr. Saurabh Agarwal, Managing Director, Infrastructure, CDPQ. He is in charge of CDPQ's infrastructure investment efforts in the South Asia region. I'd like to also welcome Mr. Michael Coe, Director, Government and Public Affairs, Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. India is a favorable investment destination for OTPP, and we look forward to his participation here today. Pushkar Kulkarni, Senior Principal, CPPIB. Pushkar is a part of the senior leadership team at the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, with over 2 decades of experience within the Indian infrastructure, and holds board positions on L&T IDPL and India's first private infrastructure trust, InvIT. Arpit Agrawal, Senior Vice President, Infrastructure, Brookfield. He is responsible for Brookfield's infrastructure investment initiatives in India. And Mr. Zaman Velji, Senior Portfolio Manager, British Columbia Investment Management Corporation. I think now it's known as BCI. He leads the Infrastructure and Renewable Resources Group, and where he leads asset management activities for the portfolio. So we have with us all the investors. We have Dr. Sandhu. I think he's also accompanied by Mr. Asheesh Sharma, Member Finance at NHAI, for any financial related questions that you may have. When we were planning this webinar and when I started reaching out to the pension funds and financial organizations, the first feedback that I got was that we know NHAI so well, we know Mort so well. So I know that all of you know each other, but this is our effort to be able to, just to give this a little push and find a clear way for getting forward and helping the pension funds define the strategy for India. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our chief speaker of the evening, Dr. Sukhbir Singh Sandhu, who's currently the chairman at NHAI. He's a senior IAS officer who has held important positions in the central government, as well as state governments of Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, and Punjab. His expertise and knowledge in infrastructure and urban development finance, IT, power, and alternative energy is immense. His literary work includes papers on urban reforms and municipal management and capacity building. I would now request Dr. Sandhu to give your opening remarks and your visions and suggestions for the road ahead. Over to you, Dr. Sandhu. Dr. Sandhu, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. And welcome everyone to this webinar. So like you mentioned just now, everyone is aware of what is NHAI and what we do. So I'll be briefly touching or refreshing a few numbers. So, you know, we are into highways and we carry about, national highways, although they constitute about 2% of total roads in India, but they carry 40% of the traffic, and that is its importance, that that's from where the revenue comes. And we have about 65,000 kilometers of national highways with us. And we have already upgraded 37,000 kilometers, and another 12,000 kilometers we are upgrading currently under about 500 projects. And in future also, the target is that every year we'll be upgrading or making 5,000 kilometers new roads, or upgrading or widening the earlier roads with the investment of about 15 billion US dollars every year. So that is the target for current year also and for future years also. And earlier we had a flagship program, National Highway Development Program, which is almost over. It was running over more than a decade. And now for the last 3-4 years, we are having a flagship program in the name of Bharat Mala, where in the first phase, we are developing about 28,000 kilometers, out of which about 11,000 kilometers we have already started construction, and about 16,000 kilometers we'll be doing in the next 3 years. It also includes many greenfield roads, expressways, about 24 number, more than 7,000 kilometers. So this is the broad numbers about NHAI. And regarding future of highways in India, everyone knows that our urbanization is much less compared to other developed countries. We are around 35% compared to more than 90% in developed countries. And the penetration of cars is also much less. It's about 15%. Only 15% of families in India own cars. So which shows that there's a huge potential in future. And with the GDP growing one of the fastest, except for this COVID period, one of the fastest growing big economy. So naturally, it will lead to more and more cars, and which means more traffic, and which means more revenue for us, and which will make our roads more viable. And during COVID time also, this is a priority of the government to bring the economy out of this bad patch, and infrastructure spending is a priority of the government. And that's why we are assured of budgetary support from the government. And for pension funds, and you have already, you are aware of the opportunities in India. Most of you have already invested. And we will, Member Finance, Mr. Asheesh Sharma, will give the details. We have schemes like TOT, where we have already successfully bid out 2 bundles. We are coming up with InvIT, which it will be the first government sector InvIT in India. We are also coming up with a special purpose vehicle to start with for some greenfield projects, and later on we are also, after seeing the experience, will be coming up with maybe brownfield SPVs also. These are the few things which offer you opportunities to invest in these roads in different models. And we always and we have interaction with some of you, and we have been getting your views and concerns which we keep addressing, and government is very proactive these days. And whenever we receive some concern from investors, so it's not, we don't take much time to bring to the notice of the authorities which are competent to take a decision. So that is a promise from our side. And of course, we want to facilitate, we want to welcome all the pension funds and other foreign investors. And that's what I want to say at this point of time. And if there are any other issues, then I'll address again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandhu. And I would now like to invite Ms. Anita George, who is a phenomenal lady with her in-depth knowledge of several growth markets and extensive experience in managing global infrastructure investment portfolios. We are privileged that you are moderating this session today, Anita, and I will now request you to please set the stage and take on from here.
Thank you very much, Nadira, and a big thank you to ICBC for inviting me. Dr. Sandhu, Member Finance, Mr. Sharma, it's really an honor for me to be here with both of you, as well as with this excellent panel that we have. You have almost every Canadian long-term investor around this table, and many who have already invested in the highway sector, and others who are looking very keenly to invest in the sector. So I think in that sense, this is a very good get-together where we have the government as well as the potential and existing investors in the national highway sector. And I extend a very warm welcome to everybody. I thought I would just say a few words. As you very rightly said, Dr. Sandhu, we are right in the middle of COVID, yet as long-term investors, we are looking at the trajectory and the potential that India holds. And India as an investment destination has always been very positive, and proof of that is the fact that you have all of us sitting around this table. We also have a renewed focus on creating a $5 trillion economy, $5 trillion economy for India, which would put us as the third largest economy, which we already are in PPP terms, but with 5 trillion, we would be there after the US and China. And this also comes with the fact that we have the national infrastructure plan that has been laid out by the government, which is about $1.4 trillion. And a large part of this is going to be in the highway sector. I have to really compliment NHAI and the Transport Ministry for the program. In many ways, you are the front runners of infrastructure in India, in that the sector has established a stable regulatory framework through the concession agreement, through the different models that the sector has adopted, whether it's the BOT projects, whether it's the HAM projects, whether it's other forms of bundling that you mentioned with TOT, etc. Secondly, also, I think the willingness of the government to put completed assets, and for long-term investors like pension funds, this is a very attractive proposition where we can invest in these assets, and that frees up and creates capital for the government to invest further in the sector. A second point that I would like to make is the importance of the national highway sector in itself. It's not just in terms of the contribution to GDP, but it's also how that contribution gets made, in that it's connecting very important economic activity as well as very important possibilities for the large population of 1.3 billion people in India to be connected to markets. And that, I think, from an economic and social development point of view, is very, very key. So in many which ways, this is a sector that's leading, and it's a sector that's critical to the Indian economy. Around the table, as you heard Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma, we have all the representatives of the leading long-term Canadian investors. And I always like to, at least on behalf of the pension funds, to make a statement, which is that every day we think of whose money are we investing. And this is really the money of ordinary citizens in different parts of the country of Canada, whose savings that we are investing in these projects. So we take a very careful approach, and we also take a very long-term approach. And therefore, I think this is a pool of capital that's very well suited to long-term, creating long-term assets like toll roads, other types of roads, etc. Also an important aspect to highlight is the fact that this group of investors, being long-term investors, also bring in global practices on technology, on newer ways of building roads, etc., on safety standards and norms. And in turn, they take the best practices from India to other parts of the world as well. So again, it goes, as I like to call it, it's constructive capital and capital plus plus. One other point I think which is very important is that ICBC, in its role as the Chamber of Indo-Canadian Businesses, has played a critical role for us in being a representative and bringing together forums of this nature. And Nadira, I really want to recognize that, because it has helped all of us at different stages. And some of the things that Dr. Sandhu mentioned in terms of the government really being willing to listen. So we have used ICBC at many times to put forward certain challenges that we face during the investment cycles. Secondly, I would say that I also endorse what Dr. Sandhu said in terms of the government proactively reaching out to the pension funds and to other long-term investors like Brookfield, to really get our opinion in terms of different regulations, different investment formats like the InvIT and REITs, for example. And recently, as you may know very well, the pension funds, along with the sovereign wealth funds, have been, there's been a part of the finance bill which has allowed for us to get tax exemption for long-term infrastructure investments for the next 4 years, which again is the government really having heard us say that for India to have a comparative advantage vis-a-vis all the other markets where we invest in, the tax structure needed to be changed, and that has been accommodated. And I think that's a very positive step. And we as investors, as long-term investors, feel very encouraged that the government is actually listening to us and taking proactive action to attract more investments. What I thought we could do to make this a really useful session for both sides is that we could come up with things that where we feel that the government can play more of a proactive role to attract more investments into the highway sector in particular, since we have the benefit of having Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma. And we can go around the table. For those of us who are not yet invested in the sector, if there are aspects of the Indian economy at large where you would be curious to know more, or you want to make some suggestions on what could make investments easier for you, I would say please also address those. And then for those who are already in the sector or who are proactively considering investing in the sector, this is a great opportunity. You have the two key people from the sector with us today, so we should really use the opportunity. So let me start with Pushkar Kulkarni from CPPIB. Pushkar, if you can just give us a very quick summary of what.
Sorry, I think Anita, you're on mute.
Okay, what investments you've already done in the sector, what are the challenges that you faced, and what would make you invest even more would be a good topic to start with.
Yeah, now, thank you, Anita. And once again, a very warm welcome to Dr. Sandhu. I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times, and it's always a great experience. So from our perspective at CPPIB, I think we were one of the first Canadian pension funds who sort of stepped into the Indian road sector way back in 2014. Under our two investment vehicles now, IDPL and Indian Infravid, cumulatively we have about 23 road assets that we manage. Out of that, more than 15 are federal government. So NHAI is our most important customer, regulator, as well as our partner, and to that end, we are very closely working with you on this. A few points that I would say is that I think one of the grievances, if you might say, of the road sector has been that a lot of regulations have changed over a period of time, and a lot of regulations have probably become dated, if you might call. And let me just give examples. For example, the issue with allowing overloaded vehicles, right? Now, this might seem innocuous at the regulation level, but what it does is it incrementally reduces the toll revenue on roads, right? And we've seen the effect of that. Or the latest sort of regulation on insurance, which has significantly increased insurance costs for the sector. Now, these are all small things, but incrementally they would eat into the returns that investors look for. On the sort of outdated aspect, I would bring attention to the WPI, which, when it was first formed in the model concession agreement, was probably the right representation of the inflation in the economy that directly impacted the road sector. But given what's happening on the oil side and the big impact that it has on the Indian WPI, we would say that this has become dated. So let me just halt here, but just hear your views around some of these aspects. Thank you.
Mr. Sandhu, I was thinking, and Mr. Sharma, if you don't mind, should we take a few questions and then you could address them, or would you like to address each one?
We can take the questions at the end and let everyone speak. Maybe there's some repetitions also.
Yes. Okay, that's what I was thinking. So let's go next to Arpit Agarwal from Brookfield. Arpit, you have also got experience already in the road sector. So would you like to share some areas where you think we can improve to do more?
Sure. Thank you, Anita. And good evening, Dr. Sandhu and all the co-panelists here. As Anita mentioned, we've been in the sector for now about 4 years. So we entered after CPP. We own and operate about 3,000 lane kilometers of roads with an AUM of about close to $1 billion. I think for the purposes of this forum, what we thought was to flag a couple of things, which one of them probably is a bit of a low-hanging fruit, and the other a bit of a strategic change. So, with our experience of operating these assets over the last 4 years, one of the things that we have noticed is that for some things, it's easier to go through, maybe that NHAI can consider a sort of a green channel route. So I'll give you an example. For example, refinancing. Whenever we have gone for a refinancing, while eventually, it gets done, there are quite a few processes involved in getting the approval. So one of the suggestions we had was, as long as the concessionaire is willing to submit some sort of a undertaking that the new debt will not be in any way prejudicial to NHAI's current interests, maybe that's something that can be considered, and then we can create a list of those kind of items which can lead to speedy approvals, and it will just help in doing business. The second one that we thought, and because we've participated in a few TOT projects already, so this is a specific suggestion for TOT, because I think one of the agenda points was also to attract more investment. So specifically from Brookfield's perspective, I think why we haven't bid for a couple of bundles was, frankly, was because of the IECV that was set. And our suggestion here was, irrespective of whatever is the IECV, bidders will always put forth their best foot forward. So if you look at the first TOT bundle, even though the IECV was about 6,500 crores, you still got the highest bid at 9,500 crores or thereabouts. So irrespective of whatever the IECV is or whatever the expectation is, bidders will always put their best foot forward. For us, why we did not bid on a couple of bundles was that we thought that we wouldn't be able to get to the IECV. And so we didn't submit the bid eventually. So maybe that's one suggestion that you can consider, that it's not really required. While there can be a soft expectation of what the value is, if you can consider just getting rid of the ICV concept, and we can figure out ways on how that plays into termination payments and things like that, and sort of help in that front. I think that would be very helpful in pushing the TOT program ahead and attracting more competition and bidders. To you, Anita.
Thank you, Arpit. Let me move on to Saurabh Agarwal from CDPQ. Saurabh, I know you've done a lot of work on the sector. I've been, witness to that. So it would be great if you could share with us ideas and suggestions which you think could improve it for investors.
Thank you, Anita. Of course, you are one of the approvers at the IC, so in the lighter vein. Dr. Sandhu, nice to meet you as well, and Asheesh, of course, we've met a few times. So from CDPQ's perspective, we've been actively looking to transact. We are not yet invested into the sector, unlike some of our other colleagues. So we do have some benefit of their learning experiences, I would say. But we have been tracking the sector for over 3 years now. And what we have done concretely, we actually have set up an InvIT as well. So we do have an InvIT, excuse me, which is yet to transact an asset into it, but the setup is there. I'd like to thank both of you, as Anita has already done it, but I think it's really important for us as we went into our IC approvals to think about which sector to really put a fair bit of focus on. Road sector platform comes to the forefront primarily because of the advanced regulatory framework that NHAI has developed over the years, and the two models which have effectively emerged as the HAM and the TOT model. One of them, HAM model, which allows the construction risk, but therefore does not offer toll risk, versus the TOT model, which which you are required to take toll risk, but you are then not obligated to take the construction risk. It's a very smart way of basically separating out the two risks as you develop, because if you have both the risks together, then more often than not, we've seen people do go wrong in the end. I think many of them are assumptions as we build models, and they do go wrong, and then we get into problems. So I at least personally think this is a great model to have both HAM and TOT continue. So complimenting you on that. In terms of what we think, what is perhaps our own immediate low-hanging fruit, I would add to Arpit's comment with regards to refinancing, but then also add quickly that change of control provisions, if there could be a little bit more clarity, speed, or flexibility on ensuring that change of control approvals are a bit perhaps more fast than what we have seen anecdotally. At least we have not really personally have had the experience in a big manner yet, but anecdotally. And in that, a corollary to that is also with regards to lock-in requirements, particularly on the HAM assets. Currently, we have COD plus 6 months as the first point at which you exchange hands, which is fine, not a problem. But then the 2-year gap thereafter to pick up the balance. If you think about from developer's perspective, developer do not want to lock in that amount of capital once the project has been completed, constructed, and demonstrated for 6 months. That it's all fine. And even from investors' perspective who are acquiring these assets, they would like to be fully in charge and managing those assets by themselves rather than having some residual stake hanging in there for 2 years, which basically does not serve a lot of purpose, at least in our view. So these two things, again, I think are in the low-hanging fruit category, which will be useful for transactions. There are several other things, but I know some of my other colleagues will have more points to add. So I'll probably pause here and pass the floor back to Anita.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you very much for bringing up those points. So, Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma, as you notice, we have those of us who are already invested in the sector and looking to do more. You have those of us like CDPQ who've done a lot of work and, as Saurabh said, very keen to invest in the sector. And I'm going to turn to Michael to give us your views. Michael, I know that you're keen to do more in India, and you see India as a good investment destination. And I also know that this sector is one that you are looking at more broadly across all infrastructure sectors. So it would be great to hear your views.
Thank you very much, Anita. And thank you, Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma, for taking the time to speak with us today. It's a real pleasure to be here. Anita, thank you for that very kind introduction. And Adira, thank you to you and ICBC for hosting this. This is a terrific opportunity. As Anita mentioned, I'm from the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. I'm personally based out of Toronto, although we have an infrastructure team also in Toronto focused on the Indian market and the Indian team that we're building out in Hong Kong, who I know my colleagues around the table have met. As I mentioned, it's a great pleasure to see you again and to meet you. We are not, like some of my colleagues, directly invested in this space, although as Anita said, we are very much engaged in...
Michael, can I interrupt? Can you just be a little louder?
Sure, yeah, you bet. Is this a little better?
Oh, perfect.
Okay, my apologies.
No.
You didn't miss anything anyway. But it is a pleasure to, as I said, it's a pleasure to be around the table. Like some of my colleagues, unlike some of my colleagues around the table, we are not invested in the road space in India, although it is something that we are actively evaluating and have done for some time. We have a very positive outlook on the long-term growth trajectory of India. We are focused on expanding our global book, and India forms a very important part of that across all asset classes. As it relates to infrastructure, we have a partnership, as many of you know, with and have with NIF, and so are quite engaged in evaluating the road space jointly with them. In terms of the highway space particularly, I'd echo Arpit's views on the IECV. I'd also say, and this is probably more of a structural piece than low-hanging fruit, but as we look at the opportunities, you know, the size of the, and TOTs in particular, the size of the bundles matter, and the length of concession matters. As Anita, when she was providing some context, and as you know, Dr. Sandhu, we are long-term patient capital. And so that long-term outlook is very attractive to us when we are considering where to deploy capital in the highway space. And of course, the size of the deal is important both for our ability to dedicate time to the asset and the deal, but also to ensure that we extract the most value out of the capital that we deploy in the sector. So, you know, and I think, you know, I don't want to speak for my colleagues. I'd imagine that would resonate with a few of them. But you know, as you think about future bundles, we would welcome an opportunity to continue a dialogue on the size and length of size of the bundle and length of concession. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So I'll move to Zaman. Warm welcome to you, Zaman, from Vancouver. So Zaman represents PCIM, and we'd love to hear from you. I know you've already invested in India, and you have interest to do more in India, and also on the highway sector. If you have some views, that would be great if you can share with us. Zaman, you have to unmute yourself, please.
Great, thank you, Anita. And thank you, Dr. Sandhu, for your time. For PCI, we are not invested in the highway space, in the road sector in India today. Though I will say, Dr. Sandhu, that despite us being on Vancouver Island, in a time zone some 12 hours away, the NHAI has made its presence felt. It's been very open, transparent, and responsive. So, you know, let that be a testament to the reach and the relevance of your organization. We really appreciate our opportunities to connect with your colleagues over the years. In terms of the you know, road sector specifically, you know, many of my esteemed colleagues here have spoken about some of the low-hanging fruit. We're not invested in the sector, and so I'll confess we're still finding our way around the orchard, so to speak. And we look at not highways in isolation, but as part of the wider transport ecosystem in India. What's happening with ports and the development of rail corridors, how does that impact highways, to a lesser extent, what is happening in the aviation sector. And so Dr. Sandhu would love to hear a bit more of your inside view and experience on how that interministerial coordination is happening and the development of a coordinated transport strategy for India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zaman. So Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma, I think we have a whole range of questions. We've also have 102 participants. So we have also a whole array of questions in the chat box. But I thought what we could do is start with the ones that you have from the different participants on the panel. And then we can go, if we have time, to the ones that we have in the chat box. And thank you again for being here and spending time with us. If you want me to run through the questions, I can. Okay, all right, that's fine.
I think I'll just touch on some of them. So there was one issue raised about the insurance, recent change in the insurance policy. So we received some representations from the industry, and we have recommended to the finance ministry, because it's not directly to be done by NHAI or transport ministry. The changes were done by the finance ministry. We have recommended, we agree with the concerns of the industry, and we hope that favorable decision will come, but till it comes, we can only hope. And from Brookfield, there was a issue raised about refinance variances. So this issue was also raised by CDPQ. So I must tell you that in the last month only, we have made the whole process online. Earlier, it was a manual process which used to take time, and many times there was a incomplete information, and the applicant always attributed the delay to the NHAI or ministry, and we always said that we are not getting the complete information to process the case. Now, after making the whole process online, if you fill the form and it's with the complete information, which is obviously there in the online form, you can't submit the form unless the information is complete. It will take, I think, a fraction of time what it earlier used to take. So that issue is addressed. Lock-in period for 6 months we have already recommended. There was a committee, high-level committee made to give some relief during this COVID issue. And that committee, we also had NHAI was also represented in that committee, and we had recommended that the period, this lock-in period, should be reduced to 6 months. It's being considered favorably. So let's hope we'll get a favorable decision soon. And regarding this one transport ministry, again, there was, when this government was sworn again in 19, so Prime Minister made a committee of secretaries for different sectors, including one for the transport sector, which had all the infrastructure and transport ministries, shipping, aviation, road transport. And one of the first recommendation to the government was from this committee, which consisted only secretary level officers, that we should have, like many developed countries, for better coordination, better planning, we should have one Ministry of Transportation. So it was, appreciated by everyone, but it's a big decision. So I can't say whether it will be accepted and implemented and when, but this was one of the most important recommendation made by that committee. This ICV issue was raised by a couple of people, and 2 weeks back only we had a board meeting where this issue was addressed. I'll request Asheesh Sharma to elaborate more on this, but there was a discussion, and there are some changes are going to happen in this ICV for the reserve price, and when it will be calculated and when it will be disclosed. Those things are being reworked. For remaining points, I'll request Member Finance Asheesh Sharma to give some more details and response. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants. So as regard to the questions which have been raised, I think most of them have been addressed by Mr. Sandhu, Chairman. We'll just try to address the remaining ones. I think particularly with regard to ICV, what I would like to highlight is that, now we have had 3 bundles. The 4th bundle is also almost ready. The concerns which have come, as it was pointed out by Arpit, that if it is felt that the model which we use for calculation of ICV, that is very transparently laid out, so we really do not have anything to that's very transparently known to all the participants, that what is the model which we are using. Now, in case there is any particular change which is required in that model, so that, because if it is felt that the ICV calculations are on the higher side, I remember it was on the higher side in the 2nd bundle. After the 1st bundle was successfully awarded to Macquarie, the 2nd bundle, it was on the higher side. But for the 3rd and the 4th bundle, it has been along the same parameters as it was used for the 1st bundle. But nevertheless, if there is any particular suggestion from your side as regards to the assumptions which are used, I would like to assure you, in bundle 3 and 4, we have exactly the same set of assumptions which were there in bundle 1. But we are still open to suggestions. In case there is any particular suggestion, we can consider that. So that's a point regarding ICV. As regards to change in ownership and refinancing, so as Chairman Sir has already pointed out, there were 2-3 issues which we have been able to tackle in the last 2 to 3 months. For example, in change in ownership, there was this issue of lack of clarity on clearance which is required for whenever any foreign investor is coming in and buying an asset in India. So there was some confusion, but the new FDI policy which has been declared by Government of India in April, that has made it very clear. So now there is no confusion on that front, and that's one of the reasons why project used to get stuck, because whether there was an automatic route for clearance for foreign investment, so that clarity was missing. Now the clarity has come, so that's why today we do not have any pending proposal as far as change ownership is concerned, and moreover we have made the entire process online. Now this is as far as the change in ownership is concerned. Refinancing, now again this is, so as we move forward now, this particular case which Arpit was referring to, now there is an issue. There we just had 2-3 issues which we are facing, which we are grappling with, because of which most of the proposals were getting delayed. One of the issues was the financing which was there in the earlier proposal, and the financing which was being asked for now, that financing was on the higher side. So there was, as was rightly pointed out, there has to be a kind of some sort of an undertaking that the NHAI liability would remain limited to the earlier financing which was done. But we've also agreed in many cases there was an elongation, so that we have already agreed to. So we have prepared our own kind of a standard operating procedure which will help in clearing all these cases. So most of the proposals now which are coming, they are as per the new SOP. At the same time, we've also had several meetings with the banks. So when the banks are agreeing to refinancing, so there are, normally what happens is the banks are putting a lot of too many conditions which are not really concerning us. So we've had a discussion with banks that when you are giving your no objection, in case you have no objection to the refinancing proposal going through, we just need to know that you've noted. We do not need your permission. Please don't give up permission with 10 different conditions, so which generally tends to delay. So that's why the new SOP has been prepared, and that SOP is now being utilized for all this change in ownership cases. There were 1 or 2 more things which were, I think, were raised by Pushkar, particularly regarding overloaded vehicles. Now, overloaded vehicle, I think what I understand what you're trying to say is that we had a particular limit for a vehicle, overloaded vehicle, to be allowed on Indian roads. So as a result, now which was stuck since the last about so many years, and it was felt that now with the newer kind of vehicles which have got a higher capacity, so we need to increase the load capacity of the vehicles which are allowed on Indian roads. So that tolerance limit was increased. And probably I think what you're trying to say, because the tolerance limit being increased, the traffic on the roads it can have an adverse effect on the toll revenue. That is, if I understood correctly, that is the point which you're trying to raise. But Pushkar,
That's right, Asheesh.
yeah, I understand. But the point is that, when Ministry of Road Transport actually considered this aspect, they were representation which were being received from all the fleet owners, from all that in India. Why are you still stuck on one particular limit? It has to go up after a certain period of time. And we have better vehicles, we have more efficient vehicles, so there is a need for to increase this tolerance. So that's the reason why it was increased. So it's purely from a technical viewpoint. It was not related to the consideration which we had from a toll perspective. That was not the consideration. The consideration was that we need to allow more the better vehicles to come in. And the WPI issue, now, for example, the point which you are raising, as far as I understand, there are some concessions. The WPI is an indication which we have been using for increasing our toll rate from year to year. That is mentioned in the NH fee rules. Now, what happens is there are certain concessions out of about 170 odd BOT concessions. There are about 30 or 35 odd BOT concessions for which the WPI linkage, the upgradation formula, is linked to a different period. The other 130 have a different period when the WPI hike is considered. So I think those 30 projects are not getting the benefit. For example, this year, the WPI has gone down in March. So they are getting adversely affected. And we were aware of that in the high level committee, which Chairman Sir has pointed out. It did pick up this recommendation, but since it required a change in the concession agreement, which was earlier signed, so already it has been recommended to Ministry of Road Transport, and they have sought comment from Ministry of Finance. So I'm hopeful this decision would come through, so that all the concession would be at par as far as the WPI issue is concerned. So these are pretty much all the questions which were raised. So Anita, I hand it over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharma, and thank you very much, Dr. Sandhu. I think you've addressed all the questions that were raised by our panelists. Before I move to the questions on the chat, I just want to ask the panelists if there's any follow-up based on the answers you just received that you have. Go ahead, Pushkar.
Anita, if you may permit me, I just have one other point, and we need not go into details of that because we're still in the midst of the pandemic. But I think as an investor, we would be very grateful if towards the end of this whole economic disruption, NHAI gives a very clear compensation mechanism so that the compensation from the economic disruption is interpreted in the same way by everybody inside NHAI, independent engineers, bankers, as well as investors. I think we would really request you to, maybe get all industry participants together, but come out with something that is absolutely simple to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Pushkar. And just picking up two questions on the from the chat box. So one question says that NHAI bond investors need an online portal with personal login credentials to keep track of their investments. Now NHAI has outsourced all communications to Beetle team. And it says that they don't have a proper website or domain email. So they are asking that this being a very important aspect of NHAI bonds, of having investors, a widespread, diverse set of investors, they would like to know if there will be improvements in this regard. Related question in terms of data and access to information is the use of data across these road assets, and if there would be some form of data that is systematized and available to both potential and existing investors across different assets. And a third question is in terms of amenities as you drive along, and this is from a user perspective, that while the highways are getting developed and widened, there is still a view that the amenities on these roads are at a very different standard from what we see in more developed countries. So the question is, will the NHAI encourage, as part of the concessions, these amenities? And a question to the investors, will the investors be willing to outsource some of these amenities to private players, more mid and SME type players? So I'll stop there. Those were the additional questions, Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma.
Yeah. So I'll request Mr. Sharma to respond to the bond investors' grievances redressal mechanism. But before that, there are two issues. One was about the data and its access. So, recently, 2 weeks back only, we have awarded a contract where presently we are collecting mostly 7 days data whenever we want some, for a road. And, because of the seasonality, this data is not reliable to that extent. But what we have decided is that on all the roads, we will have 365 days data, continuously 24 into 365. We invited bids, but because of this pandemic only, we did not receive very good response. But we divided the country into 4 zones. But in one zone, we could award the work, and in the south zone, in Tamil Nadu and surrounding states. So in 3 weeks' time, this process, they are installing the equipment, and in 3 weeks' time, the process will start. In those roads, we will have 365 into 24-hour data, and we can, make it accessible to the stakeholders. And we will have for the remaining 3 zones also. We are hopeful that in the next attempt, we will get good bids, and all over the country, we will have good data, very reliable data, and which you can also use. About the wayside amenities, we are aware of this thing. In some parts of the country, the very good wayside amenities have come up in the private sector, but there are areas in the country where we need to do more, and it is a priority. In NHAI, we have engaged real estate consultants who are visiting all our lands which are meant for wayside amenities, and they are preparing a plan, and hopefully in next less than 1 year, you will see them operational. They are in different phases of development. And for greenfield projects like Delhi-Bombay Expressway, we have acquired extra land for wayside amenities at 62 places on this road. So all the greenfield roads, we have already made a provision in other greenfield roads also. And it's part of the contractor's job to develop it. They will consider, because these are greenfield projects, and it will take time, maybe a decade or so before wayside amenities in the private sector come on that road. But it's our duty to provide basic things to the commuters. So it's part of the contract that he will build every 30 kilometers a wayside amenity, which will give on lease to the operators. So Asheesh could throw some more light on the bond issue.
Thank you, sir. Just like to add, sir, in fact, the wayside amenity, in fact, we would be very happy if investors, if you are interested, you should come and look at this also as a potential business opportunity. But till now, we have received the interest has only been shown by Cube Highway. So in fact, it will be good if other investors also. We need more wider range of investors to come and wayside. This is just a additional point to what Chairman sir has pointed out. Now, as far as the information sharing about the bond, I think that specifically are talking about the capital gain bond, the 54 EC bond, which we are issuing. Presently, we have outsourced this work to Beetle, that's the registrar. But we can think of a mechanism where directly this information can be shared by us. But if there is any particular suggestion that this is the data of this particular information should be shared, then that aspect we are willing to take up, and we'll be sharing it from our end itself. But I'll request if the panelists to the audience who has asked the question, if they can please elaborate that this particular aspect they want more clarity on, we'll definitely like to include it in our portfolio.
Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of our time, and 1 hour has passed so quickly. But I have to really thank and compliment both Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma. You've been able to answer very well every single question, in the sense that we see positive changes, improvements, greater ease in doing things. Our request as long-term investors would be if from time to time we can have this kind of an exchange, because it's very helpful to be able to speak to both of you directly. And we know that it's going to result in even further improvements. And I can say on behalf of all the Canadian pension funds and private equity fund that we continue to be extremely dedicated and interested in India as an investment destination. And as many of the people on the panel said, the highway sector is really a front runner for us. And NHAI stands out as a role model for the whole country. So thank you both very much. And thank you to ICBC for hosting this event today. Over to you.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you for conducting this in a really fabulous manner. Thank you very much to Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma for having joined us and spent time with all of us. Also to all the pension funds. Just for Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma, they are all our members, all the Canadian pension funds and financial organizations, they are members. We are dedicated to helping them out by advocating whatever challenges they face and trying to make things easier for them. I know that on your part, and NHAI is doing their level best with policies, etc., to make it easier for foreign investment into India. And I know that all the pension funds and all the participants here, they're all very eager to come in to invest, and especially in the highway sector, which, as Anita said, is a leading and critical sector for today, and it has a high interest. And as she said, that sessions like this will just help in more discussion. And we as a chamber, our focus is on keeping communication channels open, because it is through discussions, through deliberations such as these, that we can come together and find a common way of collaboration, which is better for the economy. So we hope to have many more India and Canada partnerships. Any of the participants who would like anything further, any questions further from either NHAI or from our participants, do let us know, write to us at the chamber. To all the others, I would once again say thank you to everyone for joining. Dr. Sandhu, would you have any closing remarks, or should we sign off now?
Yeah, I must thank everyone for sparing time and giving us very valuable feedback. So at the end, again, I would say that you all know this is a very promising sector, and myself being inside it and having worked in this sector for more than 15 years, I can see the future, as I mentioned in the beginning, because of the reasons I already enumerated, I don't want to repeat. And because of the very stable revenue stream and very stable toll policy, one of the most stable policy India had was the toll policy. And because of these two things, it has a great potential. And I can see at least for the next 2 decades, road sector in India has a really bright future. So you are welcome. And if there are any issues, we are always welcome to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandhu. We also have the Canadian, the companies which are into infrastructure development, such as IBI and Lee Associates, which have really made a tremendous investment in the infrastructure in India. And any next time, whenever we have this kind of discussion or forum, we will include them as well to get their perspective also into this kind of forum. I also just want to say a quick word of thanks to Mr. Raghav Chandra, who was former chairman of NHAI and who helped us get in touch with Dr. Sandhu. And we started discussions when he was the chairman, and today we are very privileged to have Dr. Sandhu and Mr. Sharma joining us. So here's looking forward to many more discussions, many more webinars which can help us further. Thank you once again to everybody. Good night, stay safe, stay healthy.